Michael. Good morning, everyone. It's really great to be here. This is my first face-to-face conference in 2 years, so I feel a little bit out of space, but here we go. My name is Konstantinos Komaitis. I am an international policy fellow with the Brave New Software Foundation in the United States. And when Michael asked me to do this, I jumped right into it because trust is certainly something, I'm hearing my voice, that I have been thinking about quite a lot as part of my work, and I have been discussing, so I'm very much looking forward to this. Just before I go and introduce our panel and we start discussing this, I think that one of the things that we need to understand is that discussions on trust, they seem to be happening quite a lot recently, but certainly trust is not a recent thing for the internet. It's just that in the beginning, trust used to be a variable. And what I mean by that is that the way autonomous systems work on the internet, i.e. the technology of the internet, when they send announcements and other autonomous systems receive them, there is an issue of trust there that is being built between those autonomous systems to send that announcement and receive the data, so then it gets displayed. However, right now, trust, especially over the past few years, it has become a restriction for the internet. And we've heard the previous speakers talk about Cambridge Analytica and a lot of other issues. I read somewhere, and I really thought that it really hits the mark. It is often said that trust is a resource you draw upon in a crisis. Now, it is much harder to build trust in a crisis, but one of the things that we know is that we are certainly in a crisis. Misinformation and disinformation are rampant in the internet. There is ransomware, actually is increasing significantly, and I hope that we will touch that a little bit with Theodora. Terrorism online, child sexual exploitation, cyber warfare. These are all things that indicate some sort of a crisis. So with that in mind, we will attempt to deconstruct a little bit the idea of trust with this panel, and we have a great panel. Let me just pull everybody's names and affiliations. So first of all, Vincent Cassard. Vincent is a deputy head of the Data Protection Office at the International Committee of the Red Cross. And before joining the Data Protection Office, Vincent held a range of field positions for the ICRC in Africa, North America, Eastern Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. Then, right to my left, we have Theodora Dragan, and she's the Data Protection Officer and Legal Counsel at the CyberPeace Institute. She's the co-founder of the Swiss Data Protection Office Association and was recently named one of the top 100 digital shapers for Switzerland. And I believe we have online, but I cannot see him online, Robin Wilton. There he is. Hi, Robin. Robin is the Internet Society's Director for Internet Trust, and his work extends across tech policy issues on the themes of encryption, digital identity, privacy, ethical data handling, and so on and so forth. So without further ado, I would like each one of you to take perhaps 5 minutes or so and tell me how do you see trust through your own work, and what does it mean for your own organizations? Vincent, shall I start with you?
Thank you. Well, I represent the ICRC, so we have a mandate to assist and support population affected by violence and conflict. So we are working in very specific environments, and trust is really the basis of what we do. We would not exist without that. We need the trust of first, the population, the affected population. They need to trust that the data we collect, the information we collect, is used only for humanitarian purpose. If someone gives you the name of his family members that he's looking for, he wants you to use this data for this purpose only, because he might be in a situation that would make him vulnerable to arrest or to other to issues. Then you have the states, and the states, it's the same. They trust that we come in a situation, in this difficult situation, that, for example, we will visit a prison, and they trust that the information we gather or the data we collect will be only used in a bilateral, confidential dialogue with them. We will not publish reports, we will not spread this information, and there is very sensitive information there. Then you have the armed group that could be in the scenario. And the armed group has a similar trust that we will get this information, but it will not be spread for other purposes. For example, we have a privilege not to testify in an international court if there's a war crime or crime that is being taken care of. So there again, there's a trust. There's a fourth one that is maybe more usual in terms of accountability, where we have donors, obviously, that trust money to us so that we make good use of it, and it's more a question of accountability. So in order to do that, we have a number of key principles. We have, obviously, neutrality, not taking side in conflict. We have impartiality in the way we deliver aid, and independence, and as well confidentiality. The challenge is to transform these principles into reality in the digital world. We, in a way, know how to do it in a face-to-face trust relationship dialogue. It's been a challenge with the digital transformation to implement them in the digital world.
Thanks very much, Vincent. Theodora, the CyberPeace Institute is relatively new, right? Yet it has an ambitious goal. How does trust, what role does trust play in your work and in the CyberPeace Institute's work?
So thank you for having me today on this panel. I am indeed the Data Protection Officer at the CyberPeace Institute. We are based in Campus Biotech, so right around the corner. And I too was waiting to join the Graduate Institute for an event, so I'm very happy to be here. So for us, we are a relatively new organization, but it's truly impressive that although we were funded in 2019, and we have run all of our operations in the last year and a half throughout the pandemic period. So we were founded right before the pandemic actually started. And despite that, we have managed to put together an impressive range of programs and initiatives that are very much connected to trust and to preventing the impact of cyber attack on people's lives. So, for example, we have a report online on how cyber attacks have impacted human lives, especially in the healthcare sector, which we have seen there was an incredible pervasiveness of cyber attacks in healthcare during the past year or so, even more than before. And this is definitely one of the main topics when it comes to trust in cybersecurity. It's that there are three elements, actually. One is the pervasiveness of cyber attacks, the fact that they seem to be everywhere, and we hear of huge cyber attacks lately from ransomware, supermarket chain. There was a supermarket chain in Sweden that was shut down. They couldn't open their stores because of a ransomware attack. There was a Colonial Pipeline attack, and they had to shut down their operations for a few days while they were dealing with it. So there are these enormous attacks, and then faced with that, people tend to feel that they are powerless. So we tend to feel that in our individuality, there is simply not much that we can do to stop that or to prevent it or even to protect ourselves. So from that point of view, there is definitely a feeling that we have seen also in our research and in the surveys that we have conducted, a feeling of powerlessness and really not knowing where to start. And we have worked, one of our main programs that we are running is called the CyberPeace Builders. And we work with NGOs based all around the world to help those NGOs to become more cyber resilient. And we do that by putting them in contact with cybersecurity experts and privacy experts who then provide input through a corporate volunteering program. So this is one of our main programs, and you can see more details actually on our website, of course. The point of this program is to really help NGOs who work with people who are very vulnerable oftentimes, and charitable organizations around the world to protect themselves from a cybersecurity point of view. And one of the issues that these NGOs encounter is that people want to fund their cause, they want to fund their mission. They rarely are willing to fund their infrastructure. So that's a huge problem that they are encountering, and we are trying to play our part in fixing this and in making the cyber space a safer place, especially for vulnerable communities.
Thank you very much, Theodora. Hi, Robin. It's good to see you again. I know that you have been thinking about trust for quite some time. Please give us a little bit your point of view of what it means, and especially for the internet society, and what sort of work is being done towards it.
Sure. Thanks so much, Konstantinos. It's great to see you again. And for those in the audience, clearly I'm appearing virtually, not face to face. So as Richard pointed out, you can't trust a word I say. It's a pleasure for me to be here, but it's a tragedy in a way for you, the audience, that it's me, because I'm actually standing in for Carmela Troncoso from the EPFL. And it's a real shame she couldn't join today, because she has just co-authored a paper published today on a very relevant topic here. The title of the paper is Bugs in Our Pockets, and the subtitle is The Risks of Client-Side Scanning. So this is a really timely paper, and I encourage everyone here to look it up after the event. It's about the risk that is posed by policies that threaten the security and integrity of the devices that we carry around with us in our pockets every day. So I would like to take a couple of minutes to follow on from the excellent opening remarks and perhaps set out some ways in which we should think about trust systematically when we look at online trust. And the first one, I think, is to propose a candidate definition. And this, I think, is in line with what both Richard and Marie-Laure said in their opening remarks. I think trust is a belief. I think it's a belief that someone else will act in your interests or will not act contrary to your interests, even if they have an opportunity and a motivation to do otherwise. So we put our trust in other people to do things that won't harm us. Clearly, when you go online, there are multiple opportunities for third parties to act contrary to your interests. In fact, those opportunities are almost unlimited, because in our online world, everything we do is mediated through at least one third party, whether that's an ISP, a telco, a mail server, a website, an e-commerce site, a social networking platform. These are all intermediaries, and they are all in a position to act contrary to our interests. And actually, it gets worse than that, because all of the examples that I gave there are essentially digital. They're in the binary, the soft world. But as Bruce Schneier has been pointing out increasingly recently, the digital world can now affect the physical world because of things like connected objects. In other words, the digital world can actually reach out into the physical world and in some cases kill you. It can certainly put you at risk if you think of things like digitally controlled and connected vehicles, door locks, CCTV cameras, and so on. So connected objects mean that the digital world can affect your physical safety. So looking at the session description, why isn't the lack of trust that people express if you ask them more evident in a rejection of online or digital services? And I think this comes back to some of the points that Richard and Marie-Laure made about our evolutionary instincts. The signals that would tell you that your trust in something is misplaced are often missing in the online world. You don't get the reliable signals back that say, this is a dangerous online place to be, or this third party is acting contrary to your interests, because the effects of what you do online are often remote from you in time and place. And so you don't get that feedback for which what Richard described as the lizard brain is evolved to cope. The lizard brain's evolved to cope with things like a fire coming at you or a tiger jumping out at you. It's not evolved to cope with the risk that accrues when you smoke a cigarette each day or when you eat a donut and build up cholesterol in your arteries. So our risk assessments about online trust are often flawed because we don't get the kind of signals that we're evolved to process and react to. Looking specifically at some of the threats, and I won't take more than a couple more minutes. Looking at some of the threats to our safety, our interests, when we go online, we should think about things like malicious apps that do things that they didn't say they were doing. We should look at zero-day attacks and the hoarding of that kind of vulnerability. In other words, things that don't necessarily exploit the functionality of an app, but which perhaps exploit a flaw in the underlying system, the integrity of the operating system, and so on. Regardless of what happens on the platform you hold, of course, there are risks that arise from things like insecure communication online. Communication that is only in clear, HTTP, when you visit a website rather than an encrypted session. Silent listeners to encrypted conversations, and we've seen policy proposals to add silent listeners to services like WhatsApp and Signal, so that law enforcement can listen in undetectably to otherwise encrypted conversations. We've seen policies for mandated backdoors to encryption. We've seen policies that proposed mandated escrow of keys. Key escrow is where you have someone around to replace the locks on your front door, and you notice that when he finishes the job, he hands you 2 of the keys and he keeps a 3rd one. And you say, well, hold on, it's my lock, shouldn't you give me that key? And the locksmith says, no, I have to drop that one off at the police station on the way back. And clearly, you would think that was pretty weird if it was your front door key, but yet governments have frequently proposed that as a solution to law enforcement access to encrypted data.
Robin, can you please, 30 seconds?
Indeed.
Wrap up.
There's a common theme across these, and it is that the most reliable way to protect your interests online is to use technology to do it, and to minimize your dependence on third parties, on procedure, on the governance, which, as Marie-Laure said, is necessary, but only a first step towards online trust.
Thanks, Robin, and thank you all. So I think that one of the things that we keep on hearing, and we've heard it in the morning session, the opening remarks, and right now it sort of comes across, is that there is this oxymoron, right? There is a sense that there is a gradual loss of trust in digital, and yet again, we see that people really bounce back to those very services that might actually betray their trust, and they continue to use digital heavily. 2 questions, I guess one question with 2 parts. Why do you think people are losing trust in the internet? And what is the impact of this lack of trust? What does it create? Theodora, I'm going to start with you.
So I think, first of all, people are losing trust because, like I was saying, there is a pervasiveness of cyber attacks, and it feels like it's almost something that is too big for us as humans to even handle and to even be able to stand up to it. So I was looking in preparing for this conference because it was Digital Trust 2025. I actually researched the data for the value of cyber attacks that is expected to, the value that cyber attacks are expected to reach by 2025. And that's $10 trillion. So in terms of economy, if we looked at the value of cyber attacks as if it was a country, it would be the 3rd largest economy in the world after the US and China. So we are looking really at an incredible threat that is just huge. And on the other side, we have human beings that don't have the same aligned incentives to take the same type of measures and to protect themselves in the same way, although information is widely available nowadays. So it goes back to what Martin Vetterli was saying before about WhatsApp and the fact that there is a tendency of people to continue using WhatsApp, although we know that there are issues with the data transfer, with the data sharing between apps, And still, people keep using it. And the reason for that is that as humans, we don't evolve as quickly as technology does. So I think that's also at the really at the bottom of the trust and mistrust topic, is the fact that we have difficulty keeping up. So to bring it back to my work and the work that we do at the CyberPeace Institute, for us, raising awareness is a huge issue, and it's something that we're very passionate about. So we try to raise awareness about the cyber attacks, but also about how they are conducted and how people can protect themselves. So it's not so much to create fear or to provoke panic, but really to provide solutions. And what was the second part of your question?
It was, what is the impact that you're feeling of this loss of trust?
The impact is really, it can be perceived on many, many different levels. So when we look at a cyber attack, for example, depending on the industry or the sector of the business that is being attacked, or of the NGO, of the organization, it's not just the lack of access to services, which is very apparent, but it's also, as a result, it's the fact that in some situations or in some industries, when we look at healthcare, there's a true impact on human lives. So in our reports that we have conducted and we have published already, we look at how hospitals have recovered from cyber attacks and how the effects of cyber attacks have been really have dragged on throughout time, and how they have had to, in order to restore their data, restore their systems, that has taken a long time. There's also an example of a hospital that was subject to a cyber attack in Germany in September of last year. And as a result, a person had to be sent to a different hospital. In the meantime, this person didn't make it. So although this case went to court and it was held that it was not entirely the liability of the hospital for not having had a more secure system, because apparently the hospital had quite a good level of security, the impact of that attack really reached the most precious aspect of human lives, which is that a human life was claimed as a result of a cyber attack. So I think really this sums it up as to how bad it can get. It's not just a financial impact, it's not just the operational impact, it's really, in some cases, it can be a matter of life and death. And again, this is not to provoke fear, but really to stimulate and to incentivize the audience, especially because we are here today, and this shows that we are interested in these issues, and we can all be ambassadors for it and talk about it and explain to people around us, and really advocate for more awareness, for more information, and for making sure that people use this information and that they change their behavior, and that they try to keep up with the pace of the technology, because otherwise we will just keep using the same systems that we are used to, just because we have learned how to use these systems. But maybe it's time for us to really step up and to try to be more on the edge, and to try and follow through and follow the pace of technology.
Thanks, Theodora. By the way, if any of you has any questions, please raise your hand and interrupt. This is meant to be a conversation. But Vincent, coming back to you, you've mentioned in your opening remarks how important trust is in the humanitarian work that the ICRC is doing. Are you seeing a change because of this loss of trust? Are you seeing a change in the ability of the ICRC actually to do its work the way it's supposed to? Does it affect the work of the Red Cross?
Well, yes and no. Yes, because we have to find solution in this digital world for the same questions we had before. And no, because there's two different stake of issues. I mean, you have the fact that the affected population, there is a power imbalance that makes it very difficult actually for the affected population to make this choice. So there is a bit of a shift of responsibility where we are extremely careful to uphold very strong privacy standards, and I'm thankful from Martin Vitaly mention of privacy, because it's a basis of our approach. And there we have one of the solutions is stands really with us to make choices where we use technology very carefully, responsibly. For example, the use of biometrics. It's been clearly an issue in Afghanistan recently, where Taliban used biometric data that were collected by the American forces and put them to a use that was not planned, basically, possibly some executions. So for us, when we use biometrics, we are extremely careful, and it's a bit in our side that we have to make this choice on minimizing the data. Then there's another element linked to government or groups and this confidential dialogue that we want to maintain. And this is extremely challenging because we have two things that are putting that at risk for us. It's been mentioned. First, the very complex architecture of service providers. How do you maintain this confidentiality there? And the second thing is legal access to data. For example, like the Cloud Act that would access to data in an extraterritorial way. And there's really a challenge, and I'm opening the floor because one of the elements is linked to some negotiations we have to minimize this risk, but as well, we need to develop tools or approaches that allow us in a digital work to have this neutrality. Because for us, the question is simple. We want to maintain the use of data for a single purpose, humanitarian purpose only, which means we not only focus on compliance, because there we will have an opposite approach. We will want that to limit the use of this data, meaning that we will want to avoid access by security forces, even legitimate access by governments, because we lose the trust given by people that are in a precarious situation. So for us, it's a difficult balance because we want to be able to answer to this simple question. Yes, this data is only used to solve your humanitarian problem, not for something else. I think so for us, the kind of place where we have more challenges is this digital space to maintain this neutrality because of this legal access, because of this complex cloud service providers, for example, or these complex architectures. And we have to find ways to, and there are ways, obviously it's incremental, but in terms of data, where you localize the data, which jurisdiction you will choose, or things like that. But that's where the main challenge is. There's obviously an enormous cybersecurity challenge, but I think it's a more common, where we are all on the same boat on that one, even if we can be a target for different things. But then the environment is in a way similar, because in terms of misinformation, disinformation, we are navigating spaces where this challenge is present and sometimes a bit more acute in conflict situation with consequences on the life of individuals, but it's the same trust that we have to build on a really daily basis, even though often we are far from this culture or situations.
Thanks, Vincent. I don't see any questions. Robin, I think it sort of goes back also to a little bit of what Vincent was saying. The internet is this decentralized technology, right? And if you have a decentralized architecture, the idea is that trust must be much easier to achieve. Yet we're finding ourselves again in the precarious position where we are. And, going back to what Vincent was saying, how do we ensure that certain forms of data are used for specific purposes, humanitarian in the ICRC's position? We have seen the emergence of trust brokers or trust agents in the internet. And this is now becoming a new business model where people are, where companies are emerging and various entities are emerging in order to ensure that the trust is not lost. Do you think that this is going to solve anything in terms of trust? Is it going to help us go back to a place where we trust the internet as a decentralized technology, or are there other things that are also causing this misplacement of trust? Just an easy question for you.
Yeah, and you're going to hate the first part of my answer, which is to be completely pedantic. Yes, the internet as an infrastructure is decentralized, but some of the services that run over it are anything but. And so it's perfectly possible that the decentralized infrastructure underneath is behaving in an entirely trustworthy way, but the things that go over it are not. And actually, that's kind of one of the problems, because one of the reasons why we tend to trust online services is that the invisible parts of the service seem to work deterministically and as we would expect. You do end up at the website you expected to end up at when you type in the URL. Your email does get to the right person. And so the infrastructure seems to be working correctly. It doesn't really give us signs that it's malfunctioning. And that's possibly because that's true. The infrastructure may well be functioning and yet be a host, a vehicle for things that are untrustworthy. And I think you raised this in the form of an oxymoron or a paradox. Unfortunately, English doesn't have a word for either of those things. But why is it that the visible behavior of a number of online services is systemically harmful, and yet people still use those services? And I think there's a funny kind of calculus here that people recognize that there is a systemic harm arising from, say, a platform that spreads disinformation. But on the other hand, they derive individual benefit from their use of that platform. And I can kind of, my spider sense is tingling. I can feel Michael Kendi having to sit on his hands so as not to jump up in the air and say, negative externalities, negative externalities. These platforms can get away with this because the cost of the systemic harm is so widely spread, and yet the individual benefit is perceived by each of us individually. So I think that's partly what's going on here. And I think we're really lucky to have Vincent here, because the International Committee of the Red Cross's raison d'etre is ethically driven. And if that were the case for all online service providers, there wouldn't be this inconsistency between the systemic outcomes that can be very harmful and the individual outcomes that can be of benefit to us as users.
Thanks, Robin. I see someone having a question. Please go ahead. Can you please introduce yourself as well? Thank you.
Cedric Amen, working for the Konrad Adenauer Foundation. And so I have one question specifically for you, Theodora, which would be if in your work you also work with parliamentarians, in the sense of, you mentioned working with NGOs to raise awareness, but that also brings me to the broader question for the entire panel, which would be if you see some specific political institutions or avenues in which they can enhance trust and build greater trust, and also in the sense of political accountability, because digital trust, as we've mentioned with the different institutions, is difficult to create because there is a lack of incentive, if we want to call it that. And thank you very
so much. Theodora, why don't we start with you?
Thank you. Thank you for the question. Indeed, an excellent question. So we do have a team at the CyberPeace Institute that is working on advancement issues, which are closely related to working with governments. However, we have a neutral position, and neutrality is very important to us. This is also why we do not accept funding from any states, with the exception of Switzerland, which as our host country, we would accept funding from them, but not from any other government. So neutrality is very important to us. So whenever we engage, it's more from having a conversation, calling for action. So we do have this kind of activity. However, I wouldn't say that we go as far as lobbying specifically. So I hope that answers your question. Was there a second part to your question?
Thank you. The second part was for all panelists, but also like your take on this a lot. If you see political institutions that are promising in creating, let's say, trust increasing measures, Also on the political level, also with International Geneva, if there's something to be done on this level.
Yes, for that, it's difficult. It's a difficult question. There is some activity, but at the same time, it's not at the level yet where I would say that we can expect to see immediate change. So it's also well known that from a privacy perspective as well, that the laws kind of follow the development, again, of technology, not the other way around. We would want that to change. So we would appreciate to have more regulation upfront rather than regulation trailing behind the technological progress. However, one example is that the new revised version of the Swiss Data Protection Act is coming into force next year. So that's definitely good news. And it is hoped that with the development of more privacy laws around the world, this is a movement and the kind of trend that started in 2018 with the European Union's General Data Protection Regulation. And there have been replicas to this regulation in different areas of the world, in Brazil, for example. More recently, also in China. China has released a new law as well on privacy and security. So there are developments. However, it's something that still needs a lot of work. And it could lead to trust, because if all the organizations around the world start to follow those laws and to comply, at least for the sake of checking those boxes in the first place, then the use of data that we see online would be more in line with what we should expect to see. Because now there's also an issue where mistrust is coming from, which is related to the collection of data that is not relevant for a specific purpose. So even when it comes to, for example, one example that I like to give often is when you purchase tickets to, let's say, cinema or a theater or the opera. Normally, when you go to the box office, you can just go, you pay for your tickets, you get your tickets, and that's it. However, when you're online, you're often asked to create an account, and that account requests for your physical address. Whereas, for example, the tickets, there's an option to receive those tickets online into your email. So there would be no reason to give your physical address. So there are issues like that organizations around the world are not really aligned on. So the amount of data collection is still a bit too much compared to what is actually provided to the customers as a service. So with the with more laws on these topics around the world, hopefully this will lead to a better grasp of privacy and security by more organizations, and hopefully in turn that will lead to more trust from individuals. Hopefully, it's a hope.
Thanks, Theodora. I'm going to expand a little bit on your question, because I think you're hitting a very interesting point, and turn to you, Vincent. Do you think, first of all, there is an increasing and intense regulatory activity currently, and a lot of that, right, is premised under this idea of trust. We are regulating to keep you safe, and you can trust us that we will do that, for instance, we're hearing. At the same time, I think that one of the consistent messages that I'm picking up from each one of you is that trust really relates with issues of privacy as well as wider human rights. Do you think that if we have such laws, right, that address privacy issues and human rights issues, will we fix privacy? Will privacy automatically just magically not be an issue once we have those laws in place?
No, but it's clearly, I mean, I have to see, I prefer to see the glass half full, because, okay, as a humanitarian, I guess I can't do anything else. But when you see the development, I mean, in different countries, I mean, I see if we follow very closely in the countries we work, the development of privacy laws or data protection laws. And we see it as a very positive sign, because mainly they are based on the Convention 108 model, and they are quite protective, and it brings some agency to the individuals, it brings transparency, so it's a plus. The other side of the coin is that it's as well an element of control and of power, basically, from state. So there are elements of data localizations that can be extremely strong. And there suddenly, maybe we have a question, because remember my my first objective is to be able to say, okay, we will use your data only for this humanitarian purpose. And no, security services will not have access because it's none of their business. We're doing humanitarian work or health work. And that's where this data localization, this more control or legal access to data that goes hand in hand with this development can be a problem. So we have to find a balance. So I certainly don't think it will be a magical element, but a positive one. And the last one is on specific use of technology. I think sometimes, I see very positively elements related, for example, to the use of artificial intelligence, and in Europe, the legal development are extremely interesting in that matter because it's these legal elements plus technical elements, with others combined, that will make us use more responsibly this kind of technology.
Thanks, Vincent. Michael, do we have any remote questions? No, I have one. Okay, please go ahead then.
Thanks. I just wanted to pick up on a topic that a few of you have been touching in terms of raising awareness. I think, Theodora, you talked about that. Robin, you were saying, that individuals want to use these services even though they're causing these negative externalities. I agree. That's systemic harms. And so some services like WhatsApp people are using even though, Martin mentioned some of the issues and reasons to stop. And then other services are actually privacy protecting, like the COVID app. So I just wanted to talk a little bit, you talked a little bit about laws that can help create awareness or create security, but what are other ways of raising awareness? How do you convince in the humanitarian space people that their data is really only going to be used for one thing? Because of course they can't see it once they've given it. They can't know where it's going. So maybe just a little bit about raising awareness and how to get people to, maybe nudge them to use services that are privacy protecting and give more information and awareness about the ones that aren't.
Robin, shall I start with you and then go to Theodora and then Vincent? Thanks.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Michael. I think the one-word answer is transparency. Certainly, when you look at technology, it's so important that the workings and the function of devices, services, applications be open to inspection, so that you can tell whether it's doing what it says on the box. And so clearly things like open standards, open specifications have a role to play there. But again, I don't think those are enough. And something that I would like to see a lot more of is a more systematic approach to incorporating ethical factors into the design and development of technology in general, but digital products and services in particular. And happily, that is an increasingly mature discipline, and there are references and textbooks and courses that put it into practice. What it tends to boil down to, and I used to subscribe to the idea that technology is neutral and it's what you do with it that has the ethical dimension. And actually, it was Professor Sarah Spiekermann at the Economic University of Vienna who gently corrected me and said, no, the technology that reaches the market is the consequence of a series of decisions. And at each of those decision points, ethical factors could play a role and should play a role, but sometimes don't. And so this comes down to a matter of design choices and fairness at each point. Because at each of those points, you can look at the product or service you're developing and say, I could do it this way or that way. Which one of those paths best reflects the interests of the stakeholders in this development? And so I would like to see that much more pervasive in the technology world.
Thanks, Robin. Theodora, please.
Yes, thank you, Michael, for this question, which is really excellent. So it brings me to one topic that I'm very passionate about, which, when it comes to privacy, for example, is about the accessibility of the information that we provide. So I fully agree with Robin as well, and what he was saying, that we need to be transparent and we need more transparency. But it's also important how that transparency is manifested. So, for example, this reminded me of a study that I saw in the New York Times, and that's also available online, of the 150 most popular privacy policies, so the most used services online. There was an analysis of the privacy policy of Facebook, Uber, Airbnb, BBC, and it was found that a privacy policy on average takes 18 minutes to read, and it's more complicated to read in terms of the English words used. The study was done on policies in English. It was more complicated to read than works like A Brief History of Time or A Critique of Reason. So it's about that. What is that transparency? Are we really making the real effort to inform people, customers, users, of how their data is being used? Or is it simply an exercise of compliance with the law? So here I'm truly very passionate about this, because I think this is also a source of erosion of trust. Also, when it comes to cookies, for example, we all hate cookies. We seem to not be able to ever refuse cookies, although it's almost like a fake choice. When you go on a website, you try to say no, but then you're taken to a lot of different separate websites where in the end, it kind of makes you say yes. Or if you do say no for the first time, you keep seeing that banner popping up over and over again. So it feels like the only way of using the internet and accessing a website in an easy and relaxed way is to just give up and to just accept those cookies. So this is a real issue, and I'm very much an advocate for writing privacy policies in a very accessible way, and using concepts such as legal design. So designing it using icons, using pictograms, using pictures, making it more easy to understand what is it actually that is happening. What should you be concerned about? Do we do this kind of thing? Are we going to transfer your data with our partners? What are they going to do with it? Which kind of data is relevant? So this is something that I really think we need more of, and I encourage you all in your respective organizations to go today and try to read the privacy policy of your organization and think about, do I even understand it? And consider that most of us, all of us, I think today are professionals with an education, but there are so many users who don't have that and simply don't have that level of understanding of the typical online privacy policy. So it's really super important. And if you have any say in that, please do something about it. Please talk to your companies and try to simplify that. Try to really explain. We have a privacy policy on the CyberPeace Institute's website. You can see that one. We have bullet points where we really explain what is actually happening, what we do with that data. It's easy to read. It's an example. I'm not saying it's the best one out there, but it's an example for how things could change. And this is really, really important. Transparency is crucial, but so is the way that this transparency is provided.
Thanks, Theodora. Vincent, you will have the last word here.
Thank you. Well, so I try to be an optimist one. Two things. First, I know there's pitfalls and dangers, but as an organization, in terms of privacy by design, you can still make choices. There are products on the market, but you can still make choices in terms of architecture, in terms of what data you collect, in terms of what tools you use. There's a cost analysis, there's a balance to be made, but it's possible. So one app at a time, you can make the right choices to have tools that are privacy compatible. And we are doing it, and it's possible. Second, there is this question of information. We are trying and making sure information is provided to a vast variety of people in crisis situations. We are dealing with language issue with people that are not always literate. The good news is that it's a pain, but it's possible. Basically, we managed to share a number of information that allow people to make choices. When you are even in a country where there's limited literacy, when you use a cash transfer product and you make clear that this tool will go through the national bank, therefore through the national authority. People can make choice of using it or not, if they are in the opposition movement, for example, or if their location is an issue. And a positive message is that it's, there again, complex, but it's possible to unpack these elements and provide individuals with capacity to control their data a bit more.
Thank you, Vincent. And unfortunately, we've run out of time, actually.